confused by the right way to do an intro while we're waiting for YouTube to catch up. But anyway, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for creating the document. I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe pull up the document on your screen and share it? We can just walk through it and go from there.
Yeah, let me see here to find it. So you want to recap what we did and what we're going to do today in brief?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that what we did last time was start writing the V2MOM, the Salesforce vision and values, I believe. And we vision, values, and methods, I think, were the first three that we covered. And we were going to review those and then go over obstacles and metrics.
Yes. All right. See if I'm doing this correctly. I have your comments here. Should I push those away or?
Leave them here. Why not? We can talk through them. Or it was, but
we can see them as
right.
we go. So yeah,
Right. So anyway,
I worked since our last time on kind of summarizing and clarifying some of what we talked about. So the vision I have is Stay and Go aims to bring clarity to your purpose, first by uncovering the internal tension in your story that is clouding it, and then by seeing how that tension connects to your purpose. And you had the comment here, how do you help see?
like I just lost track of the subject, right? Is it stay and go, and or is it stay and goes and covering your purpose and seeing the tension, or is it by helping you uncover the tension so you see, like, who's doing the seeing here?
Yeah, so I think the goal would be for us to provide you the tools so that you can see it for yourself. There is a thought that I've had around this being something like a seminar or online course where you're provided the tools and you can apply them. And there's also the possibility of this being coaching or work together that would be essentially, me helping you uncover, helping you see. But it's providing the right lens to look at your tension and look at your story so that you can see both the internal tension in it and the purpose in it.
Right. So the way it's written was confusing to me because stay and go appears to be the subject of all those verbs.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe this good thing about what is the word you could do is like, by helps you bring maybe something like that. Um, yeah, the tools is a little bit more in the well. So actually, let's think about a verb. Like, what are you doing to people? Because this is actually probably important. Is it inspiring, empowering, educated, training, teaching?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think maybe you can help me identify this. I would say giving them language, giving them perspective. So to me, that would be teaching. By some definitions, I think training could be another word. I think training maybe is a little more active, like giving them insight on how to do something. And so I think, what we aim to do is help you see your symptoms of this internal tension, that there are things in your life, for example, the realization that your desire to do something but your lack of doing it, that disconnect, that gap between what you think you want and what you actually are doing, that is a sign of internal tension, unresolved internal tension.
Right.
And by seeing that as a symptom of that, it now gives you some information by which you can now say, oh, I'm going to get curious about that. And that tells me there's something related to that or connected to that I need to uncover more of. So it's almost taking something that's unknown to you, the person whose story you're telling, and giving you a sense of like, now that right there, that's important. That's something that you want to look out for or be aware of. But then it continues there is a meaning in this. This isn't just a go dig in the dirt and see if you can find anything of value. there is again this belief that your story, your tension is there for a reason and has value. And so it's also creating a sense of clarity around your problems shouldn't just be ignored or swept under the rug. They should be considered and evaluated and even embraced. That's something that maybe is the opposite of what many of us do naturally. So I think teaching or training could work. What do you
Right.
think?
Well, how about uh, just for concision? What if we just start with stay and go helps you uncover the internal tension in your story?
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And how about then we just say your story so that you see how your attention connects to your purpose.
So that I just
You
deleted your
see.
comment. That's accurate to what I'm thinking.
Okay, good. And it's nice and short. Um, good. Let's,
I might add one word in here.
mm, tensions.
A little cleaner.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Just reflecting on this, right? It's really therapeutic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's essentially as I've been digging into this, I've been working on writing a book that outlines these concepts and brings clarity to them on the page. And something that's coming out as a theme in the book is heart versus head, and how really our heads and our hearts speak two different languages. And
Hmm.
the unresolved internal tension is a matter of the heart. And the head is constantly trying to negotiate with, or quiet, or avoid, or medicate the heart and say, how can we not go there? Because I don't know what to do with that. And that's foreign to me and weird.
Sounds
Um,
like my marriage. Yes, I could relate to that.
yes. And the head is not um is not the total source of the problem, but instead of helping solve the problem, which the head can do, the heart's sitting here saying, I just feel something, right? There's something in me
Yeah,
that's in tension. The head, by becoming curious, by becoming engaged, by looking at symptoms, can begin to understand and unravel the heart issue. So it's really helping the head. This is the teaching, helping the head understand, oh, this is a solvable problem. And by understanding it and leaning into it, I can actually address it and progress in this conversation and actually come to a place where the head and the heart are not in conflict with one another. And the heart is not preventing the head from being able to move forward, because you need the two working together. And it's a breakdown. And I think it's specifically, again, brought on by our current state in our world, where the heart is not valued because it's not logical. It can't explain itself. And the head is
yeah,
valued because it seems to be much more reasonable, much more logical, much more capable. And somehow we have these two elements inside of us at work. So,
yeah. What I've told is that traditional cultures tend to be heart centric. You make decisions based on what makes the group feel good, and that uh, modernity is precisely that we reflect and critique our hearts. And that is the basis of all the enormous power of civilization and all of its dysfunction at the same time.
yeah, it's an interesting bunny trail to go down. But yeah, I think there's a balance between the two. And we found ourselves maybe in the past with so much emphasis on the heart that we're following kind of this clouded, what maybe the head would call superstitious, um, that actually isn't totally the solution either. The point is not for the
Yeah,
heart.
I would probably say subconscious rather than superstitious.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of like the Dark Ages when you'd have this much more which the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages.
Middle Ages.
Dark Ages is a misnomer, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a reaction that got us into humanism to say let's think through this clearly, and then I think we've gone a little bit too far. So
Oh, it goes all the way back. I mean, I would argue it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden.
true.
Knowledge of good and
You're
evil.
correct there.
And it's when you put it that way, this is and I actually find it encouraging, if daunting, that these are now universal, widespread, continuous problems because of modernity. But this problem, man and woman, law and desire, uh, goes back a very long time and is arguably the reason the Bible was written.
Yeah, I mean it's the core reality. If you want to talk Garden of Eden, of when we became like God, knowing good and evil, and so suddenly now we are thinking for ourselves, and the question is how do you then think, or what's the right way to think if you're
Right.
thinking for yourself, if you're
Yeah.
like God?
Yeah. And what's fascinating is that, and we may get into this later, is I think the word balance can be misleading because it implies sort of an Aristotelian self contained golden mean, as opposed to, say, a more Trinitarian reconciliation of the head and heart.
Yeah, I mean the real issue at play here in the unresolved internal tension, the word tension and story indicate meaning, and even calling it tension is a bit of a prophecy because it hasn't yet been resolved. So the idea that you're calling it tension in a story indicates that resolution is not just possible, but it is actually um, prophesied or like declared as real. And the
Right.
reason it is because there's a greater reality of an author writing this story and intending to write it in a certain way, utilizing certain elements made available through the choices of the character, this weaving of storytelling to bring resolution. If anything, he's maybe not controlling everything about the narrative, but he's aiming to draw the character into resolution from the tension that's been provided in the story. And so by leaning in, we're actually saying we believe there's meaning to this tension, that this struggle in our heart has an answer. And that is something of a prophecy. And it matches not just the narrative of each individual life, but of the overall human story. And comes back to the Garden of Eden, where there's now this reality, this problem that needs a solution, and there's a solution that's actually prophesied and promised. And so
Yeah.
it's not by looking inside of ourselves with a greater clarity, but actually in the fulfillment of that promised resolution, in the broader sense through Jesus, in the individual sense through the reality of his life and the reality of his truth and his way manifesting in our own individual story.
Yeah. What's interesting is the thing about, like, one of the questions I had about this is like, who is the audience for this? And the uh, one of the big questions is like, are you targeting Christians explicitly? Because that comes with a bunch of A, trade-offs, and B, a bunch of linguistic baggage.
Well,
Because
I've had some developments since we last talked on this topic. Might help. Um, just a disclaimer to those who aren't Ernie, who might be watching this. Um, this whole process for us, the idea, the directive, it's all coming out of for many, maybe a very curious, even Christians might find this a curious approach to developing an idea. Was we actually just talked to Jesus about it. We ask him what he thinks, and we have questions, and we're like, okay, how do we do this? And the assumption is that he's the only one that can successfully do something, and that he's looking for people to do it with him. So that's kind of our approach, is to go to him and ask him questions. And we went and asked him this question this week: who is the audience for Stay and Go? And he made it very clear, and even showed us how he's told us this in the past, that our audience is non-believers, is non-Christians, and that what we're essentially doing is presenting to them the gospel through the language of story in a way that addresses their heart, that doesn't just address their head. So there's a very real element in what we're doing that is designed to draw people into surrendering their story and leaning into what the author's doing. And that sounds and feels to me very much like a Christian thing to do, to say, okay, you want to live your life for God, let me help you do that more effectively. But what he's telling us is that we're actually going to lead someone that doesn't know God to surrender their life to God, and to see the surrender in a more complete way. And that maybe there are some Christians out there who might find this beneficial, that maybe they have chosen on an intellectual level, or chosen on a basic level, to even surrender their life to God, but that has not yet played out to the degree in their life that leaning into this journey will bring clarity and focus to. So that even brings this question now, Ernie, to this business side of this thing. And well, wait, who's this business for, and how are we making money, and what are we paying for? And there's still some question marks over this, but it seems that we're actually going to help, in a public sense, non-believers encounter truth in their story, but it's actually by working with believers who are business owners, who are essentially maybe on the end of this journey, or need some help clarifying and
Is there an end of this journey?
Sorry?
Is there an end of this journey other than dying?
So, well, what I would say by this journey is specifically the journey of telling your story. And so you take someone who,
So the first iteration of actually being able to tell your story.
yes. And so
Okay,
you
they've completed one loop.
yeah. So the idea is that you might have someone who's a Christian business owner, who's trying to figure out, how do I do my business for God? And the answer is story. And by stepping into that process, it brings focus and clarity to the potential unresolved tension in their own heart, or provides focus and clarity to where there has been resolution, so that they can now tell their story. And that's by telling their story, they're both growing their business and the kingdom. But in that way, we actually then succeed as a business, or as a ministry, in reaching the non-Christian, who hears this story and in it sees themselves, or hears something of themselves, and is then drawn into, okay, I want to understand my story and my heart better from hearing this story. So you can help me untangle that, but it seems like it's a both and. It's both helping Christians tell their story and reaching non-Christians with those stories, so that then they can tell their story and become the Christian who's walking in their purpose and telling their story.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with all the concepts. I think the language is challenging, right? Labeling someone a non-believer sort of is a very binary way of looking at it. And I've become deeply ambivalent about the word Christian, right?
Okay.
Because it means a great many things. And in this new wineskin season I have found myself in, it's not a very useful term, because there are people who are, you know, by all external appearances Christian, who are radically opposed to this narrative. And there are people who do not identify in any way as Christian, who are very much practicing this journey already. And so the phrase that came to my mind when I was reading this is that this is anti-nihilism, right?
Yeah.
Is that and the thing that I think is, or the role implied by this, is an author. And so just kind of holding that tension, that this is something you want, the people who are unwilling to accept nihilism for whatever reason, are willing to go on a journey that might lead to an author. And there's people who have completed a loop of that journey and at least have some sense of their story and their author, who are I guess enroll. So think about, there's like a funnel, right? And I think
Yeah.
there are 5 values actually is a pretty good sequence. I don't know if that was intentionally sequential, but it feels like there's you start by focusing sort of inward at your own limiting beliefs, and then you end by focusing outward on telling your story and helping other people tell theirs.
Yeah. And what's interesting, another development that I'll share that would be helpful in this, and I'm not settled on this, but I'm getting more clarity on it, is that my role, or that the role of staying go, is not actually to resolve the tension. It's
Mm.
it's actually meant to simply bring focus and language and clarity to it. And there's a bit of a question. I think there's an opportunity where once the person that's walking through this journey has this clarity of where the tension is in their life, that I could suggest to them to ask Jesus as a person what he wants to say to that tension, even as a non. I'm going to use the phrase again. I think it has utility, maybe at least in this conversation. You know what I think. Generally what I mean. That a non-believer, someone who hasn't said, I'm giving my life to God, or I believe God exists, or God is real, that many today are not actually saying, I don't believe there is a God, atheism, or we can't know anything, agnosticism. That seems to be, at least in the latest polling data that I've seen, a small percentage of the population, something like 15% of the US population. And there seems to be a lot more people that are kind of in the space of open to spirituality, or believe that there is a creator or there is a God, not sure what it is, some version of, I'll kind of blend that with whatever feels right to me. And in this space, I think there's an opportunity to actually say, if you're open to the spiritual, if you're open to mystical things, you can ask Jesus what he wants to say to this focus point of unresolved tension. But that actually wouldn't be something that I would directly lead people. This is the part that's a little unclear. Like, I don't know if I directly lead people to that place, or if the goal is actually really just to bring them to a place of understanding their own tension, because that is actually oftentimes skipped. And maybe the biggest part of solving the problem is actually understanding and seeing it, and not just seeing a symptom as the problem, like loneliness, but seeing the problem underneath of it. And so I think that has become clear to me, that my role is specifically using the story language to help people see their tension, more so than actually then taking them through a journey to resolve it.
Yeah. So a couple things there, they're really powerful. This sounds like what they call call to action in a movie, where the character realizes there's something wrong and decides to do. It feels like they have to do something about it. Is that plausible? Would you use different
I haven't
terminology?
heard that terminology. I've heard it. It sounds more like a marketing term to me, but
Or call to
yeah, no,
adventure, maybe. Sorry.
I think that the real issue, I'm beginning to believe that to the heart, the reality of ignoring the problem and the reality of trying to solve the problem through internal meaning is more self-evidently not solving the problem. And so by simply bringing the clarity to see the problem and understand it and not shut it down, that there's an ability then to say, oh, I'm now aware of this problem. And that's the step that most people get hung up on. So by sitting and focusing on that step, we're actually able to make further progress than we would if we were to say, let's now try to solve it, which might actually frustrate or break down the process, because it is a process and it is a story and a journey. It's not something that, well, once a character in a movie has the call to action, if you want to call it that, they've got more story to lean into and to play out. And by forcing the point, we might actually make it seem like the solution isn't the solution because we're not giving the problem time to breathe.
Yeah, it's much more about framing the problem than figuring out the solution in terms of your role in this process. And that's why we try to build an ecosystem around these things, right? Because some problems are, I need to do this thing this 1 week. Some is, this is going to take me the rest of my life or possibly generations to accomplish. And so doing yeah.
There are good friends of mine that seem to be getting more direct insight from God on how to solve the problem or bring resolution to it, but they seem to be not as clearly knowing how to connect their solution to the problems people feel and the problems people experience and live. So to me, it's functioning in that spot of saying, how can we prime you in your understanding of the problem and your perspective on the problem so that you have the potential to go to one of these others that maybe has a better grasp of the solution and know that this solution could fit the problem. The first step is not coming up with a solution. The first step is actually understanding the problem.
Yeah, we talk about this phrase, falling in love with the problem, as opposed to either ignoring it or hating it.
I don't know about falling in love with the problem. I think there's maybe some potential there. I think
I can say that could be abused in the wrong way. Yeah, but the sense of the word that they use in math is making friends with the problem.
Yeah. I think that definitely curiosity, leaning in, and then I would say there's definitely, and even if we're not solving the problem, I would say just talking about the problem in certain ways is an act of faith or an act of belief to say that there is meaning in this tension and that it can be resolved.
Right.
And the fact that it isn't resolved says something, that that's not the nature of your problem. That's the state that you are currently in your story, that it's actually going somewhere or that it currently hasn't gone anywhere, being wrong is an act of, or a statement of belief that there is a right and that there is a journey to resolve.
In terms of language, by the way, I've started using the phrase problem solving was starting to rub me the wrong way. I was in a discussion group about this, and the alternate term that we came up with was challenge responding. In that, problem has has two problems. One, it has a very negative connotation. Two, the word literally comes from filling out an exam where there's one right answer and you have to probe until you find that exact one right answer. So that's why that word challenge has come up as an alternative for problem.
Yeah, I think these words mean many things to many people, and interestingly enough, story can bring some greater clarity to what we mean and what this looks like. But yeah, I can see where the word problem is problematic. But, I think there's a question of wholeness or brokenness, and so that would be another way that I would consider looking at, is that there's something that's not functioning correctly or something that's broken, and that it was whole and it's meant to be whole. And that these are definitely realities that, you talk to a mental health professional and they would say, in a very negative sense, there are problems that these people are facing that they would like to solve. There's brokenness that is causing great turmoil. But yeah.
Yeah. And certainly brokenness is a key factor. One thing that I thought, going back to the other things, one way that I was thinking of in terms of just finding language that is more aligned is this idea of storied versus unstoried. There are people who have gone through this and they feel like they have a story and they know what it is and they're enrolled in that story. And then there's people who are unstoried. they don't yet know their own story or their role in it. And for me, at least, that's an interesting, I'm not sure if it's the right one, but it's an interesting way to reframe this, not using very heavy theological language.
Yeah, I don't know. I would agree with you going back to our believer, non-believer language. Um, one of the areas that I think sounds right is that we may be drawing the lines in the wrong places, and that maybe you have someone who quote unquote is a believer, but is not yet fully engaged in their heart in this story that they're in. And so by some stretches, they might say, well, I don't need this process because this is a process by which someone becomes a believer. And for many of those people, this is the process they need just as much as quote unquote a non-believer. And so whether it's story or unstoried, I don't know what the language would be around that. And I don't know, it's always interesting because it's the assumptions of, okay, is this for believers or non-believers? That's an assumption that's the right divide.
Yeah.
And so it may be more for people who have internal turmoil, or people that have internal tension, unresolved internal tension that is causing them to be unwell, and that this process will help bring focus and language to what is unwell and what is unresolved in them, so that they can take the next step forward. And maybe it's just as much for a believer as a non-believer, or that's not even really the right language to even bring into the conversation, because it's really more about, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm convinced that story and unstoried is the right language, but I'm with you on the point of evaluating that, which dichotomy to use.
Yeah. And the more you can, um, what's the right word for this? The more you have a internally coherent worldview, the less you need to depend on external worldviews, and the less intellectual baggage you have. Like another term, like a really fascinating story I heard was a group I work with called HeartSync. It's a ministry for inner healing, dealing with fragmented cells and so forth. And they did a booth at Burning Man where they would do HeartSync with random people who walked in the door. And there's a part of the HeartSync process where you ask, Jesus to set you free of these things. And so what they did in that context is said, would you like to invite the creator of the universe to break this spiritual bondage you have? And people would say yes. And they sort of chose a functional role rather than an ontological category. And, call it the idea that this is to really help unstoried people connect with their story by ultimately connecting to the author, or an author. And so there's something there, I think, around the author,
This
that
is good.
yeah.
This is good. I think maybe to articulate what I'm curious about now is, I believe language is powerful when used precisely to help people understand in a word or two something that is more complex. And so, we have available to us a lot of words that have been combined in many ways, but there's still infinite number of combinations left. So figuring out what are the words that help people understand the unstoried reality. I think you're right that it has less to do with your maybe religious standing. And so the question is, how do we position this? Because I actually think very, very much that someone who, let's say, refused at the end of any conclusion of Jesus being the author, or God being, the God of this universe, or the creator being the God of Christianity, I think they would still find this process very helpful and the language very helpful. And I would be happy for them to find it helpful, because I think the language is, again, something more of the heart. And you find people who are saying right now on a scientific level, very definitively, there is no God, there is no creator, and explaining the world as a scientific world. And then what Francis Schaeffer calls, they go through what's the jump. And now they start talking about the meaning of humanity and the purpose of humanity, and what's beautiful and right and what's wrong in humanity, without giving any indication as to how they got to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And I would say that person might actually agree more with me, because we're now discussing meaning and beauty and right and wrong. And they might say, I reject how you got to where you got, but I agree with where you are, at least on some level. And in that regard, I think, as a Christian who wants to bring people to a place of knowing God, I think that this is a helpful step, even if they're not ready to come into knowing God. If that's the journey that I'm thinking everyone should be on, then I don't need to push the point. I can simply provide help or insight in this element of the point and see where it takes them on their journey.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Should we scroll down?
Yes. So I hadn't thought of these as progressive, but I kind of was thinking in some ways. I guess maybe there was some progression that I was unaware of that is there. I gave some more clarity, I think, in the language to these. You had changed this or suggested this be hope, or no, respect or
Second
honor.
one. Yeah. Love works.
I think there's an element in this that I don't know if it's present, and that is even valuing ourselves, valuing our own story. I think there's definitely in our culture a value for not hurting other people. And I think there's also a value for not hurting yourself, but I think that's a greater battle, is actually the ability to see yourself as valuable and see your own story as valuable. And so to me, that's where I don't know, honor and respect. I guess we can honor and respect ourselves. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my concern with love was that the uh, uh, um, was precisely just that when I first read it, it's like, it's not, because I think this is, and maybe this is part of this idea that your job is sort of the call to adventure portion. Your job is not to solve their problems. And some people define love as solving other people's problems. And so that's a tension. Reading it now in the context, I don't feel that tension as strongly, but that was the tension I had that made me make that comment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of the challenges with the word love is that it means some very different things to different people, and has it's quite an important word to different groups today that use it very differently. And let me think on it. That might be one that I like honor. The challenge with honor and respect is they feel more military or clinical, or there's
Almost
something about
archaic.
them that feel archaic a little bit. And
I guess honor is a bit more archaic. Respect is a bit more Aretha Franklin. Yeah, there might be another word in there. But okay, we'll just leave that tension for now.
yeah, and then we had belief here, which you liked. You said hope is another option. I actually really like hope, and I probably wouldn't throw any fits about replacing belief with hope. I think the idea of hope is the idea that, well, the thing that might be confusing about hope is there's a use of the word hope that is sort of like, I don't think this is going to work, but I hope it does.
Wishful thinking.
And
Yeah.
and I don't mean that. I mean a much more there is resolution available. Even the idea of story is the idea that your tension can mean something. And I think maybe even more than can mean something, it does mean something. Your tension does
Yeah.
mean something. And
Yeah.
that's where the wishful thinking of hope might be confusing to some, but maybe not. The challenge with the word belief is that it has a very easily misunderstood as religious bend to it.
Yeah.
Because
Or also even just an opinion.
yeah, I think belief has I think Christians would assume that non-Christians also believe things, but I don't know if non-Christians would assume that they believe things. Like it's not as clear
Mm.
to them that they have a set of beliefs.
Right. It
And
depends a lot on the context. Right? I mean, everyone says, yeah. And the word belief is also massively overloaded within Christianity.
like you might
You
say,
know,
a non-Christian might more easily say, I don't believe or I do believe, but they might not say,
sorry, as a
I have
sentence.
I have
People,
a
people
belief.
all say, like, I believe it's going to rain tomorrow.
Or like I believe that people are inherently good, or that like that. I think you would find people saying that all the time, or I believe that each
Right.
person
So
should do
everyone
what
has
seems right to
everyone
them.
has beliefs. There is this phrase in Christianity where we talk about belief like as a thing, which I've always found bizarrely confusing. Right? It's like, oh, I'm a believer. Like, but like, what exactly do you believe in? And that kind of matters. And I think there was this. I think this is like a romantic era, like 17th to 18th century kind of a thing, where suddenly belief became this thing that people like, I believe, without like, and that was a shibboleth, even though the content of the belief sort of became irrelevant, which I just find bizarre.
Yeah, we could potentially find a better word than belief here. It feels accurate from my vantage point, but the thing about hope is that's nice because it sounds like okay, both these words are going to maybe mean something different to someone. But just us saying hope here, I think there's something in it that actually in this context denotes that it's not wishful thinking. Like to me, hope is more of something like that's contextualized in its own sentence where you say, I hope it doesn't rain. We all know that it very well may, and you have no power over that. So you're wishing something. But when we say something about we have hope as we look at our story, we're saying that with a very much definitive, like not we might have hope or we think we wish we had hope, but it's actually like defined as like more definitively. So in that way, I like hope better.
Yeah. The one downside of hope I realize is that right now every one of your values has a different initial letter, which I find incredibly useful when I'm writing summaries and but anyway, enough said on that.
You're
I've raised my
you
tensions.
come from a generation that values the aesthetic of acronyms like V2MOM, and
That's also true. Yeah.
I don't value that aesthetic. I'm not saying that I think that
Yeah. No. Yeah. And
it's
actually,
worse. I
this
just
gets not
don't.
about acronyms. It's like if you um, and maybe it's not here, but if you are creating a table of things, you know, being able to label the columns H, L, B, C, and E uh, is useful in very tight spreadsheets and things like that. Purely a aesthetic consideration, not a reason to choose a
If
word over another.
if there's something that's the opposite of a story, it might be a spreadsheet.
You would be surprised. I mean, my definition is right. A story is something that happens to characters you care about, and if and when I did accounting training, one of the big challenges was learning how to read the story in the spreadsheet. And as a business owner, you will have to get very good at that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
finding the tensions and is going to be. I think we may get to the bottom of this document. We'll see.
I'm gonna accept the hope for
Okay.
now in the face of maybe we'll have H2 mom or something like that.
Yeah. All right.
And it seems like maybe you didn't have any qualms with
Yeah. These
concepts
all.
at
I
first.
like those words. Those are powerful words.
Expression is a good word because it's very accurate. And right now, I would say it's one of the values that uh, that very few would argue with.
Yeah.
It's very much
Yeah, at least in theory. In practice, I may get offended at someone's specific story, but in theory, everyone's in favor of expression.
yes, individual expression is in right now.
Yeah, but I think the hard part is not just self-expression. It's like I want to make sure that I create a space, and that's like you're staking out like this is what we believe. This is important, and
Yeah,
that's good.
yeah. So we
All
come
right.
on to methods now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, did I write this? Did we discuss this in our last call, or did I just make this up since then? I'm trying to remember.
I'm not sure. I think we touched on it. Telling stories, giving people another story. Is it giving space to hear, creating space to hear? Uh,
Creating space. Yeah, this is an interesting point as well as the language that, you know, and this is a real question that I'm wrestling with. I believe that um I obviously believe there is a creator, and I believe that he is the Christian, like Jesus, in this space, and don't just believe it as sort of this set of philosophical claims or beliefs, but as a present person with whom anyone can have conversation with, and that he's also the author of your story. And so there's some conclusion here, which I don't know, again, how much of the resolution I'm going to offer or attempt to offer, but there is at least something here where you could find somebody who says, I have come to the clarity of what my unresolved tension is, and I am staring at it. And there's maybe a couple of places. One, there's maybe one person who says, I don't know how to resolve it. I don't know how to address it. Can you help me? And the only help I could offer that person is to say, ask the Spirit of Jesus, who you can talk to. There's another interesting person that could be someone who's found some sense of peace in themselves. One of the ways that I've achieved peace, I lived in quite a bit of peace. And I don't know if I would have ever come to this conclusion or this place in my story had it not been for my marriage. And some of the things that the Lord told us to do in stepping into missions, because I achieved peace by ignoring the tension in my story and by acting like it wasn't there, and was very much not present with it, and would tell you that I was totally good and totally fine and not mad at anybody and not upset, not frustrated. And I was good. I was chill. And so there's interesting question around the person who arrives upon this conclusion of tension and says, I don't feel tension, or the person who says, okay, I am overcome with tension. What do I do? Do I refer them? Do I tell them to talk to Jesus? Do I offer them some spiritual practice or mental, what do you call it? Meditation
Discipline.
practice that addresses this on some level. Because, my belief is that without coming to peace with the storyteller and without interacting with the storyteller or paying attention to the story that's being told around you, that you are going to continue to conflict with the story and find yourself with the unresolved tension remaining. How that plays out in practice is a question.
Yeah, and again, this is where I'm a big fan of functional roles. Right? Is that like just call them the like if you like the word God, like I said, I've got a philosophy podcast with some very erudite philosophers, and like they don't define God. They just like are reacting to this massive amount of cultural baggage around it. And so that's the idea of the idea of an author as like as a thing that as a person you can listen to, right? Is it's I guess it's very meta modern, is trying to find a locally meaningful term without getting dragged into big ontological commitments.
Which I would say my hope in this is to draw people to a place in their heart and where there's a mindfulness of their heart place, and to allow the author to speak to their heart. And I believe that it's actually encountering the author in your heart space that is both where the potential solution is, and where to me it's the most potential for it to work for somebody, versus this idea of saying, which I think this is the kind of hoop that I'm feeling like I'm throwing out or setting aside or putting to later, is that many people seem to say, oh, you need to make a statement of faith or a belief as the first step towards interacting with the author or with Jesus, that's the first step. And I think for many people out there, the idea of saying, I am going to choose to believe this set of claims or become a Christian or whatever you want to call it, would be a massive barrier for them actually hearing and receiving peace from the author, from Jesus speaking to them. And what's interesting is that there are very few people right now who are opposed to the idea of Jesus completely. I mean, New Age utilize Jesus to a large degree. There's different versions and things that I would say that aren't Jesus they talk about, but even all religions. I mean, I think it's Buddhism and Islam and these different religions value Jesus as being this source of wisdom. So I don't feel like picking a fight around what is your religion or what is your set of beliefs before you can actually just talk to Jesus and let him say something to you that you might find helpful, could be a much more effective route, or whatever end we're after.
Right. You familiar with the idea of a bounded set versus a centered set?
I've heard about this before. Can you explain it again?
Sure. No, but the idea is that in a bounded set, you have a very clear sense of who's in and who's out. And so there's all sorts of, I guess for technically the term is club goods, but things where, you want to know who's in and who's out is the important thing. And so, membership and breeds and borders are all about who's in and who's out. The other option is the idea of a center set, which is a community of practice. Anyone who wants to can come in and do this thing, and your status is based on how well and how much you're doing the thing, not on a bunch of extrinsic factors.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think what I'm aiming to do is, and I maybe I need to change this language, but give people perspective or tools for their journey, for their story. And I'm very much happy to help anybody with those tools, or help anybody receive a better perspective or insight into the nature of their problem, or whatever you want to call it. That being said, I find it, this is where the other part of me that conflicts is, I think today there's very much a state of Christians that have, and I know I'm triggering you every time I use that word. Maybe I'll keep using it for that purpose. But, we have played along with secularism in a way that I feel is not helpful to those who are searching for truth, in that we will say to people, my faith, or what I believe, or my story. And it's very common for people, when you share your faith today, for them to say, I'm so glad that you found that's your story, that's what you believe. And there's a certain part of that that's totally fine with me, this reality that people are not going to believe what I believe, and that we can be at peace and love and value each other. But there's also an element that we see actually in the Bible, where there isn't a presentation of God as an option, but there is like a statement that you proclaim that is God. You just say God is real and he loves you and he's with you. And the truth of that is meant to do something to you. You can reject it, you can accept it, and we have lost our willingness to stand up and say there is a truth. there is a right, there is a reality, like that. For me to make a statement to say you are living a story that matters, and there's an author and there's resolution, that those are declarative statements. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to wimp out of making a declarative statement. I think it could be made in a way that's religious and that feels off-putting to people, or that feels us versus them, that I am very much open and interested in having a conversation around. But also the idea of saying, find your own way, and that way might be Jesus, to me is just unclear and unhelpful to people that I'm trying to help. And so I'm wrestling with the best reconciliation of those realities.
Right. I mean, the way I look at it is I have I guess it's technically heretical, I suppose, but I think it's actually biblical, which is an empirical perspective on what it means to be a Christian. That is, that Jesus is the ultimate nature of reality. And therefore, a disciplined, honest, collaborative pursuit of reality will always lead to Jesus. And then the hard part, what is it, the Hebrews line? Whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and he rewards those who seek him. Right? I would argue that your creed here is you must believe that a story exists and it rewards those who seek it. And if you believe that, then it's a very short leap to an author that a story exists, not just I create my own story.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You know, my view is that apart from God revealing himself to us, that we have no way of discovering him. And so there is a revelation of God that is in Jesus himself, but is also in this collection of separate books that have been put together as the Bible. That these are revelations of God, or the places where he has said, this is who I am. And I don't agree with Thomas Aquinas that we all have an unfallen intellect that is able to think rightly about the world. And so to me, I would call Thomas Aquinas the father of humanism, the first one who said we can get to God through our own thinking as well as through the scriptures or through revelation. And so to me, there is a willingness to interact with people on the basis of something other than the Bible, but there's also something about we've gotten a nasty meaning around the word preaching, proclaiming, heralding, whatever you want to call it. There is this element of preaching that was called foolishness, and there's an element of saying out loud what is true that the heart will bear witness to. That I'm not unwilling, or I'm wrestling with how to reconcile that as I interact with people. But I think there are people who are desperately looking for real resolution, and the challenge is that those who have spoken to them the words of the gospel or spoken to them the name of Jesus have not addressed the unresolved tension in their heart, and have not had the tension in their own hearts resolved, the people speaking those words. So you end up with a misrepresentation of Jesus and what he offers. And I don't know if I want to abandon that method because it's been done poorly, but instead do it well. But
Yeah, I'll tell you where I've ended up on this, which is that in any given context, there are certain truths that people need to acknowledge to be able to function. Like if the bus is leaving at 10 o'clock and they do not acknowledge that truth, they're going to not be on the bus, right? And it's like, okay, we are going to discuss, how to make money for a business. If you don't believe in capitalism, that's going to be a problem. So we have functional requirements that are necessary in order to be able to operate within this context, like believing that story exists. And there's also different levels, right? You're enrolling people on a journey, what they have to believe to watch your video is different from what they have to believe to become a storyteller, right? There's things that you learn along the way. You can decide at different points whether you want to opt in into those beliefs at a functional level so that you can perform those roles. 10 o'clock. I gotta get to that soon. The second thing is, if people ask a question, there is great latitude to give them an honest answer. And so for me, like Peter being hauled in front of the Sanhedrin, they asked him a question and he used that as the excuse to launch into a sermon, right? So thinking about what are the functional requirements for participation. Let me just let this person know I gotta. I'm running. He's probably thinking I'm not. I've lost my. Let me just send a quick message. I'm going to be running 5 minutes late, so we can wrap up.
We should have some reminder of our time that pops up 5 minutes out.
Yeah, there's actually supposed to be a Zoom app for that, but anyway, so that's how I've resolved it: is have the minimal set of functional beliefs that people have to sign up to participate, and then wait for the Spirit to prompt questions. And when those questions are asked, like even in the big sermon that I think that they gave in the book of Acts, people were saying, "Are these people drunk?" They were asking a question. And the thing that I think that really ticks people off is when you get a sermon and you have not asked a question.
Fair enough.
Anyway,
I guess it's maybe the willingness to answer those questions honestly when asked that might be a good way to articulate it. That I don't want to say in this business or in this process that there are no answers or real answers to questions, or that we can't address things as we go. But I think you're right. What I'm attempting to do here is go with a heart approach to story and to belief and to these questions versus a head approach. And so I certainly don't want to jump the gun and say, here are the head level beliefs that you need to agree to engage this process on some level.
All right, so we should wrap up. And I think this was a good discussion and a great document, and working through some of the tensions, that we feel, practicing what we're preaching, which is excellent. So the next two steps are obstacles. And someone said there's the hard part and the important part. Like there's a lot of things that are really hard and raising money and whatever. But I think what they talk about obstacles here is primarily like we said the important part. Like what are the things that get in the way of people? And I'm not sure, I haven't checked the thing is of other actually it's what is the things. I guess leave it at that, right? What are the things that and I guess there's two different aspects of it. One is what is it that keeps people from doing this? Right? What are their internal the challenges that people face, and then what are the practical challenges you face in accomplishing this?
You want me to work on that for next time?
Yeah, I think that's probably fine. That's probably enough, frankly. Metrics is after that. If you feel led, you can go to that, but it's probably better to talk through actually, given methods, you could probably start thinking about some of the metrics, but I mean, just put it as a category just to finish off the list. You don't have to do anything with it. That's the last one.
Yep. Sounds good. I appreciate your
All
time.
right, let me pray you out.
Yep.
God, I just thank you for Philip and the extraordinary calling you've placed on his life, and just the wealth of intellectual frameworks and tools and knowledge that he has. But I thank you even more for his willingness to just grapple with these tensions. And I pray, Lord, that as we grapple through these tensions and wrestle with our language, that we would be paving the path that others will follow as they seek to find their own story and their own tensions. thank you for the time that we've had together. I thank you for the great things you're going to do. And I pray a blessing on Philip and his family in this season of transition. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Man, thanks, Ernie.
All right. God bless.